Welcome to those of you joining us on Facebook and YouTube for the Twilight Bible Study here at Pilgrim Congregational Church in Pomona, California. Very glad to have you join us. We are studying Genesis chapter 14, verses 17 through 20, which is a very Facebook and I gotta stop myself for the Twilight Bible Study here at Pilgrim Congregational Church by the door in Pomona, California. Very glad to have you join us. Let's see if I can stop myself. Yeah, I think there is somebody there. I'll get it. So it's Andy joining us.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah, so glad. Come on in, have
Yeah.
a seat here, Andy.
We are so glad to see you. Yeah. Let's this down. Yeah.
Andy, remind me your last name again.
Pena, P-E-N-A.
Pena, Andy Pena,
Yeah.
yes. So we're so glad to have you here, Andy. I got a Bible for you here. We're in Genesis chapter 14, verses 17 through 20. So, yeah, right here.
Thank you.
So, welcome to all of you, Facebook and Zoom, and we may have a couple more join us. So, I'll give everyone a couple more minutes. Let's see if I think I bumped the table or something. So, very good. So online we have Steve McMeans and Megan Olson, Arthur Truman, and I believe that is Guadalupe joining us as well on Zoom. And don't see anyone else on Facebook yet. But welcome to those of you on Facebook and Zoom. And I have Andy Pena here along with Maria Kasner here in my office. And very glad to see you all. And we will take another minute or two since it's a couple minutes before 5:45. I appreciate all of you being so punctual. It is helpful to be a couple of minutes early because when you do things online like this, it's helpful to start at the same time every time and be kind of precise so that people can find you when they're looking for you on Facebook or YouTube. So I appreciate your being a couple of minutes early to help with that. And as I said, we're in Genesis chapter 14, a very unusual passage, but kind of fun and interesting and challenging. But I think we'll have a good study tonight. So hope everyone is doing okay. Arthur, remind us when you are returning.
Yeah, that'll be on February the 15th. It's a Thursday, I think. So I'll be able to join on the following week from that date.
Okay, wow. So still another month to go. That's
Indeed, yeah.
quite a trip. Well, I hope that you're enjoying your time there. And
yeah, I've got some interesting materials to share with you when I come back. I went to a
good.
place yesterday called the Museum of World Religions, and it's here in Taipei. I've got some interesting books and materials I'll bring back and share with you folks. Okay.
Yeah, I would definitely like to see that.
Yeah, it's the theme of plurality that we were talking about a while back, and commonalities between faiths and things like that. So
right.
I'll bring that along.
So Very good. Very glad for that, to look at that. So, and then let's see, looks like we've got someone else joining us here. I believe that may be, oh, and the Elwoods have jumped on now. Welcome, Elwoods, Robert and Gracia Faye, and probably Faye Ellen in there somewhere. And then, or Dr. Infinity is her nickname, I think. Oh, and our friend Katie. Hi, Katie. Welcome. We can't hear you.
You're going to have to explain Dr. Infinity. I need to
Oh,
know.
and there's our friend Kip too. Hi, Kip. So it looks like we've got a house full there for yeah, for Bible study, and there's someone else at the door. So hold on a second. Let me see who this is. I can grab it. Stops. Nope, did not.
I don't think I'm there yet.
I wouldn't do it if you're not comfortable. No. There will be a time, and this is the right place, but it's probably too soon. If you push yourself too much, it will become, I think, we don't want it to be stumbling.
Just hear myself. Sorry.
Yeah, that is online. We have a bunch of people online.
He's having too much of us.
I got too much memories.
Yeah, I understand, but
Okay, well, so it was more
we'll
than
pray for you.
Yes.
that.
We have.
Stay in touch. Okay, I will stay in touch. All right. Yes.
Mhm.
So we've got Jenny White and Jerry White who are joining us as well. And it looks like that was Cedric maybe that jumped on here.
Yes, hello.
Yes. Hi, Cedric.
Lorraine's listening in.
Oh, hi, Lorraine. So, wow, we've got a bunch of people listening in tonight. That's great. Well, you picked a very interesting night to participate in Bible study. It's a very strange and unusual passage from Genesis chapter 14, verses 17 through 20. And so I'm going to give a little bit of background to this passage, and we'll have a little bit of Bible class and theology class and some reflections tonight. So I'll start with a little bit of the background. So one of the things that's can be helpful. I mean, these stories in this part of the text were written probably and certainly heavily edited in about 500 to 600 BC. But the events that they point back to roughly are going to be about 2000 to 1800 BC would be the time period that you would put Abraham if you tried to put a time on it. That, of course, there's no way to really confirm exactly when that was. But it can be helpful to think of it that way. If you remember, if you think of Abraham in 1800 to 2000, and then think of Moses around 1500, and then think of King David around 1000, and then you had BC, and then it is helpful to think. So, I mean, the extraordinary thing is that, we're talking about a time period. This text is talking about a time period from about 4,000 years ago. So pretty incredible. But there's a lot going on in terms of the use of a text and what a text is supposed to do. I mean, the primary purpose of the book of Genesis as a part of the Pentateuch, the 5 books of the law, the first 5 books of the Bible, is to tell the story of Israel. That is to tell how Israel came about and Israel's relationship with God. And so you have lots of questions about you have a lot of origin questions. I mean, the first one being, where did the world come from, right? And this one touches on the issue of the priesthood. There is and this is one that was picked up in both the Jewish and the Christian traditions, but there's a reference here to a character, a priest king by the name of Melchizedek. And Melchizedek is obviously, as a character, as a historical character, comes before Levi and Aaron, so comes before the Levitical priesthood, that is the traditional priesthood of Judaism, but he's referred to as a priest. So you have this odd situation where, on the one hand, the priesthood didn't start until Levi came along, and Aaron was, I think, his grandson or great grandson of Levi, and so it's typically all of the priests would come from that family, from the Levi family. But here you have a story about a priest king. He's explicitly called a priest, coming, several hundred years before Levi. So it raises questions about what a priest is and where the authority of the priest comes from. Roughly speaking, does it come from the tradition, or does it come directly from God in some way? And then the early church made a lot of this distinction, which you find in the book of Hebrews. Chapters 5, 6, and 7 talk about this character, Melchizedek. And there's one other reference in the Old Testament, which is really important, which is Psalm 106, a reference to Melchizedek. And the reason that's important is because it basically says that Melchizedek is an eternal priest, and sort of implying, as the writer of Hebrews says, no mother, no father, eternal, that he had a sort of eternal status as. Now, I don't know that the writer of the book of Psalms intended that, and certainly don't think that the writer of the book of Genesis intends that. But the book of Psalms does say that, let's see, it's Psalm 106, I think it's 106, 9. Does that sound right? Let's see. 17, Psalm 1, I'm sorry, 110:4. I was off. Psalm 110:4. So this is going to be really important for the kind of character that Melchizedek is, the way that Melchizedek is treated. Psalm 110:4 says, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek." And that was presumably for David, or the king of Judah, so that the Jewish king in the tradition is made a priest of this order of Melchizedek rather than the Levitical order. The early church picks up on this and says that Jesus is the high priest in the order of Melchizedek, this sort of eternal concept of priesthood. And there have been, as my father-in-law Robert pointed out, I think yesterday morning in devotional, that that there are many Catholic priests and many traditions within Catholicism that emphasize the Catholic priesthood being a part of that order of Melchizedek, that a close association with that. It all sounds a little strange, but I think the bottom line is that there's something to be made of being a priest, that is, of taking care of spiritual matters in this way. And then, of course, in our tradition, as I've preached many times before, we are all priests. That what it means to be a member of a congregational church is that you are a priest to others in your community. All right, so we'll get back to that in a moment because it's pretty important. But first, a kind of I want to say historical textual context here. So this is the story of Abram before he becomes Abraham, before he's renamed by God. And he has a nephew named Lot, and his brother's son. And there are a bunch of tribes in this area. They're probably not really what we would think of as nations. They're probably smaller than that. They'd probably more like tribes, even though their leaders are referred to as kings in this passage. So anyway, to give you a bit of the context here, you have one king in particular, Chedorlaomer of Elam, that appears to be the most powerful of the kings, and he is sort of oppressing and probably taking, an early version of taxes and that sort of thing, taking his share from people. And some of the tribes, some of the people in that area, particularly, I think, 4 or 5 tribes, get tired of it. And so they rebel against this king. Probably means they just refuse to pay him their dues. And so he organizes some other tribes, and they go and subdue these tribes. And one of the tribes is, one of the cities is Sodom, which we learn about later. And Sodom, if you remember, is where Lot lives. So when these kings joined Chedorlaomer, I didn't say that right. You got to do all the syllables. Chedorlaomer, when they join him, and they basically they rout the people, and take all their stuff rather than taking what they think was a fair share. They just took everything, and they took Lot captive. And so at that point, Abram hears about it, and he gets involved. And one of the few passages in the Old Testament in which Abram or Abraham is presented almost as a military figure in chapter 13, he goes after Chedorlaomer, chases him down, the text says, basically, all the way to Dan, it says, and defeats him and takes all the stuff back and gets Lot back and all of his family and possessions, and brings them back. And so our passage in verse verse 17 basically picks up after the battle now. And basically the context is that now Abram is the most powerful leader. Now, importantly, he's not referred to as a king in the text, because technically Israel doesn't get a king until Saul comes later, when Samuel anoints him. So,
Could I make a comment there, Patrick?
yes, please go ahead, Edric.
In verse 10, it appears that the king of Sodom perished. And we're just about to start, and the first words in my Bible are, and the king of Sodom went out to greet him.
Well,
So
what
he
I
came
have
back to...
what I have in verse 10 is, it says that the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. That is, they ran away. And some fell into the bitumen pits, and the rest fled to the hill country. So my text does not say that they died. It just says they ran away and they lost all of their goods and provisions. Anyway. So your text, Cedric, says that they died?
I got cut off.
Did you hear
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, only just.
Oh, okay.
I'll read verse 10.
Yeah.
And the valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits, semicolon, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there. And those who survived fled to the mountain. It's quite ambiguous, so we'll leave it at that.
Well, the translation of the New Revised Standard Version is that some fell into them. That is, some fell into the bitumen pits, and the rest fled to the hill country. But yeah, so there were certainly people that it's describing in the story anyway, that people died. But anyway, getting back to the introduction, the context then is that Abram is now seemingly the most powerful leader in the area, because he has all of the provisions now that were taken away. He's got them, and this probably means, like, you know, all the resources, the cattle, families. This would be so now he was already pretty wealthy, but now he has everything. Now, in the context of these kings joining together to go into battle, it's good to remember that they were not always on friendly terms. It was kind of like a political situation where you've determined that it's in your best interest to work with someone who might in another context be your enemy, right? So sort of in some ways kind of typical politics. So what's happened now is that it looks as if these kings, who had, particularly Sodom and Gomorrah, who had been routed and all their stuff taken, they're basically coming now with hat in hand to Abram to see how much of their stuff they might be able to get back. My son would appreciate this, I think, in the Minecraft video game, where there, Cedric, you do die, and then you reappear in your bed, and you go back to the place where you died, and you lost all your stuff. Everything is there, and if there's another character in the game, they can just pick up all your stuff, right? And so basically what happens is that Abram has picked up all the stuff, and now the king of Sodom has to go to him and beg him to get, or at least try to negotiate some way. And this is what happens in the Minecraft game as well. You try to negotiate getting some of the stuff back, right? So that's what's happening in these verses. And so let's read them. It's just 4 verses, and beginning in 17 of Genesis 14. After his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him, that is Abram, at the valley of Shava, that is the king's valley. And King Melchizedek of Salem, so this guy comes out of nowhere. He's not even mentioned before. This is the first time he's ever mentioned. And King Melchizedek of Salem brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. He blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, maker of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. So, several things about the text. First of all, as I said, King Melchizedek is mentioned for the first time, and the only time, in fact, until he's mentioned again in Psalm 110 that I read earlier. And he is of Salem, which most people think is Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, Salem at the end. There are a couple of reasons for this. One is that Salem is a name for Jerusalem used in Psalm 76:2. So in Psalm 76:2, I don't have it marked, but I think I can find it. 76:2 says, His abode has been established in Salem, his dwelling place in Zion. So it appears to be, I mean, this is talking about in Judah, God is known, his name is great in Israel, his abode has been established in Salem, his dwelling place in Zion. So it would seem to indicate that Salem is another name for Jerusalem. Another interesting thing is that Melchizedek is the name means king of righteousness. In fact, the way the English translation reads, I think it would be king of righteousness. But so Melchi being a term for Lord or king, and Zedek being righteousness. And so there's a close association between being a priest of the Most High God, or God Most High, El Elyon is the Hebrew, and righteousness. And this theme we find in other places in the Hebrew Bible as well, that this association between Zadok, or there's another, the king of Salem in Joshua 10 is referred to as Adonai Zedek, Adonai Zedek. So it's like Lord of righteousness. Adonai is a for Lord. So there's an association between righteousness, the priesthood, and Jerusalem. And all of
Jerusalem mean?
What does Jerusalem mean?
Something peace?
Yeah, let's see. I don't know what I don't know if there is another meaning to Jerusalem.
Is this the first time that this connection between the righteousness and the king and the Jerusalem has it been referred to?
Well, it's the first place in the Bible, in the way that it's first in the way the Bible was put together. But these texts, were edited years later, so it's hard to say exactly when. What most scholars think is that there was an ancient association between Jerusalem prior to Israel coming to that area, that is the pre-Israelite Jerusalem. There's an association between that and this priesthood, and also to righteousness and to the worship of God Most High. So there's a tradition that when David moved into Jerusalem, that there were people there who were predecessors who were not actually a part of the Israel nation, that were a part of this priestly class associated with the city, and they stayed on because they worshiped this God Most High that is said to be the same as the Yahweh. So that's a tradition within Judaism, that possibility that this is one way to explain how it is. How it is that a priest comes out of nowhere from a different family and tradition and says and gives a blessing as a priest of the God Most High. So it's and not only that, he brings out bread and wine to do this. And of course, we have associations with bread and wine as well. And he blesses Abram, and then blesses the God Most High, a kind of praise for having delivered the enemies into the hand of Abram. And then Abram gives him 1/10, that is a tithe of everything. A tenth of it is given to Melchizedek. Now, one of the oh, right. Mom had the answer to the question of Jerusalem. Salem is a version of Shalom, which is peace. That's right. And so Jerusalem is city of peace. Yes, right. So thanks, Mom. Let's see, where was I at the end here? Oh, so one of the issues here that might be in play is a justification for the practice of giving tithes to the priest, rather than it simply being something that is established by tradition within the tradition. This is a kind of story that is external to the tradition in some ways, because it refers to this priest who clearly comes 100 years before Aaron, hundreds of years before Aaron. So lots of interesting questions about about what to do with this passage, both historically and textually. I mean, the bottom line is, in terms of the history, we haven't been able to identify hardly any of these names and places of these kings mentioned in chapter 14. There are like 9 different kings, and they seem to be symbols. So, for example, in verse 2, King Bera of Sodom. Well, Bera means evil. So he's named as an evil king. Yes, right, King Evil of Sodom. So it appears that that is part of the story, rather than an attempt to give some kind of historical information. So now the theological issue that's interesting here that goes all the way back to the early church is what's called a typology. A typology. And typology is basically the theological theory that, I mean, if you take the larger version of this theory, it is that the characters in the Old Testament are types that show up again and again. And so you find it in both Judaism and Christianity, these types. And in the New Testament and in the early church, they're often types of Christ. So for example, Jonah may be compared to Christ because he was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and then out. And so that's compared to Jesus' death and resurrection. So in the theological tradition, then you have what's known as typology, where the character in the story is a type of something that comes later. And here, Melchizedek is a type for the Jewish tradition. He's a type of priest, and for the early church, he's a type of priest, but also a type of Christ, because now he's linked to this eternal standing of the priesthood that the author of Hebrews really wants to emphasize. This idea that of Jesus being the high priest in the order of Melchizedek. So the text then has a very central historical and theological role for both Judaism and Christianity, to think about, what does it mean to be a priest? What does it mean to bless someone, to bless God in verse 20? I think there are several features here that I find interesting, that appeal to me. One is that Melchizedek seems to play almost like a neutral role. Like wasn't involved in the fighting at all. Didn't seem to take a side. In some ways, it feels as if Melchizedek is serving as a kind of mediator for these negotiations, for how much is Abram going to give back to Sodom, the king of Sodom. So what we learn later in this chapter is that Abram says, you're taking it all back, except for the spoils that some of the soldiers took. But you're not going to give me any of it, because I don't want you going around saying I made Abram rich. And so he says, I think for political reasons, sometimes interpreters say, Abram was such an honorable man, and I guess he was, but I don't think his decision there was so much about honor as it was a political decision, because he says in the text, in 22, the king of Sodom, basically in his deal, 21, he says, give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself. Basically, give me the people, all the people, I'll take those back, but you keep all of the possessions. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have sworn to the Lord God Most High, maker of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal thong or anything that is yours, so that you might not say, I have made Abram rich. I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten and the share of the men who went with me. Let them take their share. So Abram says the others that helped him route, they can take a share, but I'm not going to take any of it. So there's something I think important about this idea of a priest being neutral in political affairs. Now, it's a tricky business because being neutral in political affairs ought not to be interpreted to mean neutral in moral affairs. So, and it's tricky because politics and morality obviously are intertwined. But I suppose what I mean by a kind of neutrality in politics would be like we try to do with our, with our tax status. That is, not identifying with a particular party, political party, or having a candidate, representing a candidate, that kind of thing. I think there is some biblical backing for those kinds of distinctions, that you could actually, as a church, you could say all you wanted to about the issues, the moral and social issues, but not getting involved in the political parties and politics in that way seems to me to be pretty important. That might be a bit of a stretch for this passage, but I do like the way that Melchizedek just seems to come out of nowhere and doesn't seem to have, as we would say in the South, doesn't have a dog in this fight, right? There's not a, which is a terrible saying, by the way, but anyway, but doesn't have a political interest here. So I think kind of important. Then, of course, perhaps the most interesting feature of this passage is Melchizedek seems to be a priest of Yahweh, the same God that Abram has been called by. And so it really opens up the door to the possibility of God's being worshipped in other traditions and contexts that where you might not expect it. And right here in the story of Israel, now that it's not all that uncommon. You have in the Hebrew Bible, you have lots of characters who are not Jewish, who are not a part of the Jewish tradition of Israel, and who are blessed by God and become people of faith. I mean, a couple of them have books named after them. Ruth was not from the Jewish tradition. Job is not from the Jewish tradition. And you have other characters that are blessed. Jesus refers to a couple of them in his sermon at Nazareth. So it's not all that unusual to find references to people who worship God or who are blessed by God outside of the tradition. It's really in the history of Christianity that we've had several traditions and major traditions within the Christianity that have kind of closed that loop in a way that I think is unfortunate and not consistent with the text. It seems to me that we have to be open to God's working in other contexts. So let's see. I think that's it. Most of what I had to say here. I have a bunch of other notes, but questions or comments?
I got one, if
Yeah.
nobody minds.
Go ahead, Steve.
So I was thinking about the other verses. Excuse me, I have to turn my back to look at my computer screen. And I'm thinking specifically, I looked this up on my Logos Bible tool for, I'm not going from memory, folks, just to let you know. So I'm looking at Luke 20, verse 41, where Jesus is talking about how can they say that that the Messiah is David's son? For David himself says in the book of Psalms, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. David thus calls him Lord, so how can he be his son? Well, this is a shortened version of Matthew and Mark. And I wonder, here's my question. Does Jesus actually endorse this idea in these passages of the order of Melchizedek? Because surely he knows the whole psalm,
Luke,
right?
Yeah. And that is from Psalm 110.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's from Psalm 110, verse 1.
It's from Psalm 110, verse 1. Yeah, you're right. So so that was the passage that I was reading. You know, that's very interesting, Steve. I did not come across that possibility.
Yeah, very interesting,
well, let's see. What is it? What is the verse from 110? Verse 4, right? Yeah. That you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. The Christian interpretation of verses 2 through 7 has understood the king's victory as prefiguring Jesus' resurrection and rule over the nations. So I assume that, yeah, that the order of Melchizedek would be important there. But in that passage from Luke,
you probably want the other passages from Matthew 21 or 23, 1 through 7.
Yeah.
It's quite long.
Well, in that passage, if I understand correctly, I think Jesus is responding to some questions raised by the scribes, right? And he's talking about the resurrection. That's when they ask him about the resurrection. And that convoluted story about the brother or the woman who marries all the series of brothers who die, you know, and they say, who's she going to be married to in the resurrection? And Jesus said that the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And so he goes on, and the scribes say, "Teacher, you've spoken well," for they no longer dared to ask him another question. Then he said to them, how can they say that the Messiah is, or the Christ is David's son? For David himself says in the book of Psalms, the Lord said to my Lord. So the questions, he seems to be responding to the idea that the Messiah is a son of David by saying, because David calls the Messiah Lord.
I guess what I'm saying is,
but it's in the same passage as the Melchizedek passage. Yes.
Yeah. So Christ is obviously familiar with this. does.
Yes.
And the it doesn't record the Pharisees saying anything, right? So I
Right.
wonder, or being able to say anything. So I just wonder if it's not just, if there isn't more to the story, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that didn't get recorded, because
Yeah, no, it's very possible. There's an entire text found in the caves at Qumran that's called Melchizedek.
oh really, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yes. So there's an entire text, and it contains this story from the book of Genesis. And then it goes on to make some other claims about Melchizedek that don't show up anywhere else in the text. Um, so Melchizedek does seem to be, I guess, the what you can draw from that, I think, is that Melchizedek was seen as a figure in Jesus' time, around that time, um, as a as an important figure. Um, and as I said, based on this passage from Genesis and the reference in Psalm 110.
Mm-hmm.
One question that I would have for you, for all of you, I suppose, is that it seems to me that the sort of application of this text, this is your chance to help me with my sermon on Sunday. It would seem to me that that part of the application of this text would be, for us, would have to do with um, being, as I said earlier, being open to God's presence in other contexts that are outside of the pilgrim tradition, outside of the Christian tradition, outside of the biblical tradition, that God is at work in other places in ways that we might not fully appreciate. Yeah.
I missed a question.
Yeah. So the question is, what is the application of this passage for us?
The Genesis passage?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll let somebody else answer first,
Yeah.
but
Patrick,
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Megan.
I might not be hitting the nail on the head quite effectively, but to me, it's saying just be open-minded and be heartful in your interaction with other people, because if I'm getting there because you talked about the application outside of the biblical tradition.
Yeah.
So like I said, I might not be hitting the nail on the head, but I'm getting just be open-minded in your interactions with other people.
No, I think that's good. There's also, I think, some guidance here in the concept of righteousness. That is that this idea that Melchizedek is the king of righteousness. One of the things that one of the things that happens in the story of Israel is that religion, the practice of religion, moves more and more away from just rituals. Well, in fact, in its sort of crudest form, it would be, I'll sacrifice this animal or this grain in order to get something, in order to be blessed by God, in order to win a war, or to have, good crops or lots of children. It shifts from that, or from that being central, to a connection with living righteously, with taking care of people in need. And then you have lots of, text that emphasize God's compassion, lots of emphasis in the Psalms on the Lord's compassion, particularly for people that are oppressed or poor or in difficult circumstances. And so this might be one of those very early sorts of messages that this is the direction that we're moving in, is toward a concern for righteousness. Yeah, go ahead, Maria.
Supremely prideful to think that our traditions are the only ones out there.
Maria says we're supremely prideful to think that our traditions are the only ones.
Would correspond to our creators.
Yes, I know. Yeah, I know. Well, I don't know, but it's pretty common. I mean, I suppose you find it in a lot of traditions. You do find.
But we're supposed to be better.
Yes, right. Yeah, that's right. And I think what's important here is that what I would like to emphasize is that this is a biblical notion. It's a biblical notion that we should be aware of the fact that God may be working in other nations. So in one sense, I would almost like to argue that I'm being very conservative here by taking a very conservative biblical approach. Yes. Lorraine, go ahead.
When you were talking, I missed a little bit there of what Mario was saying, but I also wanted to say that what comes up for me and how I would relate it to now is that they've had a battle. The righteousness comes, I think, in Abram refusing to take anything from those who were defeated. I know it's a political move, but it's also a very upright and honest thing, in that he's not out there trying to conquer the world, or hopefully.
I think that's good, Lorraine. Actually, that's a very good point. It also shows that it is possible to put together a political decision with a righteous one as well. So I think you're right, and I shouldn't be too quick to dismiss that. No, I think you're right about that. Certainly the king of Sodom didn't expect it. Clear that the king of Sodom thought he would be lucky just to get his people back. So there, and you could, I think, rightly say, this is a kind of move, as you say, Lorraine, a kind of move toward righteousness, toward righteous ways of living, where you don't take advantage of people. Yeah.
It's a shocking thing. Is someone else talking?
No, go ahead.
It's a shocking thing to have someone you just had a battle with who conquered you, who doesn't say, there, you earned it, and turned around and walk away with everything, so to speak, but to stand up and say, I'm like you lost, here's your stuff back, I don't really want it, because this is a bad way to start out. And we both are here living in this world, and our dealings need to be honest, upright, and straightforward, and as equals. Now, I'm adding a lot to this, but that's what comes to me.
Well, I think you're onto something. I certainly would agree that that there's an element of righteous living as being that's being put forward in the way that Abram responds. I think that's right. Yes, Robert, did you have something to add there? Or was that Faye? Faye, were you trying to say something?
There we go. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dad.
Okay, I just wanted to point out the Eucharistic overtones of the bread and wine that Melchizedek brought forth. And that's one reason why this Melchizedek priesthood is important in the Roman Catholic tradition. But there's much more to it than that, I think, in that the ideal of the Eucharist is, of course, people gathering together as equals to receive the same elements of bread and wine, kneeling, people of different political parties and so on, kneeling together at the altar rail and so on, as one can often see. So I think that here this presents Melchizedek as presenting an offering which unites and enables those who are present, the other kings and so on, to be equal before the throne of God and receiving the gift of God.
Wow, that's very good, Robert. This is what I get for living with the retired religion professor from USC. Thank you, Robert. That's excellent.
Daunting, isn't
Yeah,
it?
very, very good. Yeah, go ahead.
It's actually a very powerful, and I mean, when we first started this, I thought, what does this mean? But now that you've brought all this up, I think to myself, it's actually a very, very powerful piece of the Bible, of the Old Testament, because this stuff goes on after people have been fighting and arguing. They're both left kind of knocked out, and yet open to what's going to be said or done next. And Abram really took the high ground. He really took the high ground, because he didn't say, I'm going to knock you on your face, pal. You know, you were such a jerk. He didn't say any of that. He said just the opposite. He treated him as an adult and said that he was going to give back most of it, except what was necessary for the soldiers and things like that to exist within that. Amazing.
I think that's a good place for us to wrap this up, because as I think about it, and your comments reminded me of this, Lorraine, verse 18, and King Melchizedek, that is the king of righteousness of Salem, of peace, after this battle. So in the context of a battle where people were killed, people died, and people lost lots of their possessions and were clearly suffering and hurting. People came together to share bread and wine and to bless God. So it gives us, perhaps in the context of our own world, a message of hope and peace for Israel and Palestine, for Ukraine and Russia and Lebanon and Yemen and other places where.
And I wanted to say that it's really completely relevant to today, and a good sign that we really need to pray for those who consider themselves winning or will win, that it isn't their idea that these people are now under their power, but like especially right now, I'm thinking of the Palestinians. They're losing everything, including life, and I'd like to not just see what Israel will do now, but or when it finally is over, but I would like, and I hope that they will realize that just because these people don't agree with them, and just because they suffered the horrors of the past, the Holocaust and all that, that peace starts with God and needs to be in our hearts. And they'll need help and rebuilding.
Well,
And
we'll
yeah.
certainly pray for peace, and we can do that now as we take
yes,
prayer requests. So we'll pray for peace in Palestine. Thank you, Lorraine.
yes.
Other prayer requests.
Andy.
Yes, I have one. I went to see my uncle yesterday, and he's he's 90 and he's on his deathbed, and we had a chance to talk. He doesn't want to eat anymore, and he wants relief. And he said to me, he can't get out of bed, and he said to me, this isn't living, this is existing. And so I just want to pray for my Uncle Jim, that he would have a smooth transition and without fear and all of that, I suppose.
Yes, absolutely, Steve. We'll pray for Jim. Also, we want to pray for Andy Pena. Andy was here earlier. Andy was for many, many years the assistant for Robin. What's Robin's last name? Robin. I always, yeah.
It was Snyder.
Robin Snyder. Thank you, Megan.
Mm-hmm.
Robin Snyder. And Robin passed away a couple of weeks ago, a little less than 2 weeks ago. And he would come here, Andy and Robin would come to Bible study. And Andy came tonight and he was too broke up to stay. It reminded him too much of, it's been a very difficult grieving process for Andy because they were together for so long. But I've been talking to Andy and really encouraging him to come to church and get involved so he doesn't fall into kind of loneliness. So we'll pray for Andy. Other prayer requests?
Yes, Patrick, I have. Dad's been traveling, but
Okay.
prayers of thanksgiving that he made it home safe yesterday.
Good.
And just continued prayers for his strength and stamina for the rest of his travels.
We sure will. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a prayer for Cedric, since he may not say it for himself, but he has to get on a high fiber diet, and it's not easy. And it's even hard. We go to Staters, and it's hard to find some of the things that he needs. And it's absolutely essential that he does this so that he doesn't run into more serious problems, because the one he's got is enough trouble. So, or enough heaviness, let's put it that way. So, yes.
So prayers for Cedric.
Yes.
We'll pray for Cedric. Well, thank you, everyone. Let's pray. Eternal God, we are so very grateful for the opportunity to study the text. We're grateful for the guidance that the Bible provides for us, and we're especially grateful for its stories, and stories of love and compassion and hope and peace. And we think, when we think of peace, we think of all the stories of war and strife that we read about each day. And so we pray very sincerely for peace in Palestine and Israel and Lebanon and the Mideast. We would pray that that there would be a time when the various leaders could sit down together to share bread and wine. And we pray especially for those that are suffering, families that are suffering in all parts of the world, that you would comfort them and give them strength and help them to feel your presence even in the midst of pain. We thank you very much for your servant, Robin Snyder, and especially for sharing with him the last few years of his life here with us and Bible study. And we pray especially for his assistant, Andy, as he grieves over the loss of Robin. Give him strength and help him to feel and to remember the good times with Robin, and help him to be strengthened by that, and help him to feel your love and comfort. Help us to know how we can best support him. We pray especially for Steve's Uncle Jim. Passage and transition from this life to the next is very mysterious and very strange to us. And we ask, Lord, that you would be present with Jim in this process, that he would feel your power and your comfort, and strength. We thank you for the members of the church and the servants, and especially for your servant, John Olson, that you would continue to give him strength and stamina as he travels, and be with Megan and comfort her during John's times of travel as well. And we pray also for Cedric, that you would bring healing to his body. And we're grateful for medical personnel that are trying to help him. We ask that you would bless them and bless his efforts to respond to their care. And we ask that you would bring healing and strength to him. We thank you for this church and ask that you would continue to bless our efforts in this community and around the world. And we ask all of these things in the name of Christ. Amen. Thank you, everyone. We had really big crowd tonight. About, it looks like about 15 people on Zoom, and another couple or so on Facebook. And thank you to all of you who joined us on YouTube as well.
Have a plug. The tour for the shelter is tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Meet us at Benson and Knight Street.
Yes.
Short tour of the
Upland family.
Foothill.
Upland, yeah, Foothill Family Shelter. Yeah. Foothill Family Shelter. We're getting a tour of the facilities there at 10 a.m. in Upland at, what's the street?
Benson and Knight Street.
Vincent and Knight.
That's
Another praise of gratitude, prayer of gratitude, I should have mentioned, is the birth of Reagan Elizabeth last week, to Mary and Ryan Prendergast. She's doing very well. Got another report from grandmother today, and she's doing very well, eating a lot and very healthy. So we're really excited. I don't want to give anything away, but they're hoping to come to church on Sunday. So it'd be really to be able to see the little baby on Sunday. Yeah. So yeah, that would be great, wouldn't it? So thank you, everyone. I appreciate you being here, and look forward to being with you next week, and have a good evening.
Thanks a bunch. Take care, folks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Love
Thank
you.
you, Patrick.
Thank you.